Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network, where we talk about Wildbow's most revived work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse,
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
and we're here live in the Discord to talk about two parenting-focused chapters. Go for the throat 23.a and 23.2.
Yeah, quick bit of housekeeping though, sorry, before we get into that. The fan art contest has just closed, so if you're a patron listening to this any day now, the post will go up on Patreon where you can vote on those. We got a bunch of really good ones. I'm very excited to share this one. Most entries we've had in quite a while, so yeah. And then the rest of you in a week or two, you'll be able to see them all after the votes have been cast.
Yeah, so it's exciting times. So stay tuned for that. But let's talk about the girls, shall we?
I really like how this chapter did just throw in that quote because
Throw in the reference. Yeah,
I feel like most of us were probably reading it being like, "Oh, we need to talk about the girls too," and then Connor just name dropped it, and it was exciting.
yeah, it was wonderful. So yeah, it's exciting to be back talking about in the parents' perspective, and it really, really pays off, doesn't it? It's such a good chapter.
Yeah, like I think parenting or like what it means to be a parent, what a parent should be, has obviously been like a big thing in Pale the whole way through. I remember Arc 20 in particular got very focused in on the idea of like what happens when kids sort of grow beyond their parents and stuff. Anyway, it really does kind of feel like 23.a is the beginning of the climax of this particular theme or exploration in the story. Like, as much as we're heading into the final confrontation with Charles and stuff, and all that plot stuff, and there's other themes, like this is really the chapter where I was like, oh, this is the final boss of like all of the ideas around parenting and what it means to be a parent in Pale.
Yeah, definitely. As well as kind of setting up quite elegantly the stakes for the conclusion of the story, right? I think it's cool how these two threads come together.
Yeah, you're right. It's also used to really help establish the upcoming fight as the final conflict in a fun way.
But yeah, let's get into it. We're in Kelsey's perspective this chapter. Kelsey and Connor talking about how they're going to manage, and Kelsey's considering quitting her job and kind of explains the context of that decision to Jasmine as well.
Yeah, and it's really funny, I think, that this is happening in the wake of Avery getting shot, just because I think we talked a bunch about how like Avery's little holiday in the Paths last arc could be mapped to her like almost getting lost before the story and that really dark patch in her life. And it was like, oh yeah, arc 22 is showing us like how things are better now because she came out of it and it was like stronger, and she had people like Snowdrop to help her, and so it was a reflection of it, but it was showing how much she'd grown. And like this is now, I guess, the other side of that. Like I hadn't considered that. Also, we know that parents have grown and gotten better, and so this is almost like Connor and Kelsey didn't do as much as they could to help Avery after Miss Hardy pulled her out of the nosedive. And this is their chance to get it right again. And so, like, as much as it was like a win for Avery last arc, kind of, doing a better version of what happened to her before the story, it was like, oh, and now we're getting to see the parents have their crack and see how that's going to play off of how Avery's doing now. This is so fun that it's like the other side of Avery kind of repeating what happened to her before is the parents' reaction to it. It just makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing that really struck me in this conversation was how glad I am that Connor, Kelsey, and Jasmine all like get along and are all so immediately on the same page about everything. Like they're all so reasonable, and then I think it's Jasmine says like we're going to be in each other's lives from now on just because of the bond that our children have opted into, which is totally right. And so the fact that they're all in the same, like, God, imagine how rough this situation would be if it was Brett. You know what I mean? Like, and he's just so clearly not on the same page as them.
Yeah, I mean, he was in the previous Can We Talk About the Girls and brought fucking nothing.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Like because there's talk in this conversation about what it would mean to break the Kenneteers up, and it is very much treated as like a worst case scenario thing to do, probably aside from letting them die. Uh, but yeah, like just I don't know the way because it's one of those things again in the other verse where it's kind of like, oh well, yeah, of course the Kenneteers are going to be together for the rest of their lives. They're like magically intertwined in the ritual, but like it has become so much more than that. Like they just kind of gonna be friends forever
Yeah.
now. Like, so yeah,
I mean,
like
they're effectively each other's in-laws at this point. The parents are, right? Like,
it's a similar kind of relationship. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Friend in laws. Yeah.
friend in-laws, yeah.
uh, I also really loved that we're seeing this trio of parents get to work all chapter, and there's some really fun parallels between the trio of parents here and the trio of the Kenneteers. Like, Jasmine is obviously a bit of a Lucy. Connor and Avery have a lot in common, and Kelsey acts as this really fun, like Verona in the group, or in some ways almost an anti-Verona. Like,
Mm.
um, and this was the thing, like, this chapter is a Kelsey chapter, but it had the Verona banner, and so at first I was like, "That's a weird thing to do for an Avery parent to give her a Verona banner."
Yeah.
But I think there is a lot of the way, like Kelsey very much acts as the person in this who brings ideas kind of out of left field, like, or like she takes a lot of her like business stuff, like something you wouldn't think is relevant, is able to map that to the magic stuff and use it, which is like one of Verona's signature moves. And then Kelsey's the one who does bring up all of the points where it's like, okay, we need to ask the question of if it's okay to do this plan that none of us want to do, which is also usually Verona's role in the group. So there's just
Mm.
like there's a bunch of ways Kelsey kind of acts as the Verona in this, and it makes. But we see these three work really well together in this chapter, and I think it's because in a lot of ways this trio of parents mimics the setup of the trio of Kenneteers, and that's just super fun.
Yeah, I like that observation a lot. Yeah, so this start to the chapter to me is really interesting because it's like you can tell that the parents are rambling, both because they're tired and also they're
Yeah,
kind of dreading the topic that they have to discuss here and like the hard decisions that they're going to have to make and the kind of impossibility of these decisions. But then because they're rambling, it's also just giving us some really interesting insight into like the backstories and characterizations of why they're going to make some of the decisions that they make, right? Like
yeah,
um, Kelsey's like role at work and what role she plays there, and Jasmine's like thoughts on how Lucy was when she was younger and the potential ways that she has failed or had to decide how to deal with like Booker and Lucy's quirks growing up. Like it's just such a richly layered conversation. It's wonderful.
yeah. Especially because like, yeah, there's just something so nice, and I feel like it's going to be something I bring up a lot today. But like the way this chapter and the story in general are treating these guys like fully rounded people. Like they're not just the parents, like I don't know, in the way of the girls doing magic. There's
Mm.
genuine. Yeah, I mean we'll talk about it at length, but like the parents have a genuine case here, and this chapter and the story in general has done a really like a really solid job of making it clear to us why that's fair.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's easy to imagine in a story that didn't make the parents feel multidimensional. The end to this chapter would be okay, now the parents are coming in and taking away the fun from our
Yeah,
characters that we love. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
being jail wardens, not yeah,
yeah, even if the decision they make is for the exact same reason and they handle it in the exact same way or whatever, like if we didn't understand the parents or feel their humanity, it would be, oh, they're the police that are coming to ruin the fun of this story that we're reading,
yeah,
but giving them that context, it makes it feel like this is a hard decision that they're making, and the decision that they come up with feels good, like I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
I mean, we'll talk about that when it happens, I guess, but.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot to talk about there. But yeah, I agree. Like you feel the weight and the importance given to this decision. Like yeah, there's a lot of notes on that. I also think like as well though, Walbo does that sort of classic thing where I think there's a lot of really layered stuff in what Kelsey is talking about. Like she's just kind of talking about her job, but it's very thematically relevant to a lot of the rest of the conversation. Like she's talking about giving up her job for her family, even though like her job or why she excels at it is because she does like a very Kenneth thing. Like she's like,
Yes,
oh, the
yeah.
reason I do so great in my job is because I invest in the people and I help them be their best and learn. Like, it just basically sounds like she's her workplace's like miss. And it's like a very direct parallel to what she's going to say about the Kenneteers later. That's like she is willing to give all that up for the Kenneteers. So there's some mirroring there between like what she's willing to do and what she's asking of them. And then
Mm.
there's like all this stuff relating to like the power dynamic shifts in her company where people are getting demoted or moved around because the higher ups decided they wanted less hierarchy and it had to get flatter, and so everything's changed. And it's just like that feels like what's happened to practitioner society in the last 6 months of the story.
Yeah.
So it's like it's priming us to sort of not only see Kelsey as somebody who thrives in that environment and is a problem solver, but like she's already mapping out how it's a little similar to what's going on in the magic world, and that's where she thrives time and time again in this story and in this chapter is as somebody who is able to take like just the mundane business world and map it to what's happening to the world of the otherverse.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing to me is, well, I guess it's worth talking about this now. Like when they make their decision and talk to the Ken and others at the end, what I thought they were going to do was like offer to awaken and kind of take their kid's place at first, um, because the parts like this really make you feel like they're so like their kids in so many ways. Like there's such clear um, ways that they would thrive in these situations that it just kind of jumped out to me as like, oh, is that where we're going with this? And I think I'm glad that that's not where we're going with this, but it just is so interesting.
Yeah, I mean the idea of the parents awakening, I think, feels like something a lot of us think about because the inherent problem that is talked to death in this chapter is there is a huge power imbalance with what the
Yes.
Kenneteers can do versus the awareness, and that's something they're really struggling with. And like awakening feels like a quick way for them to try and close that gap. But yeah, it comes with so much other loaded baggage that like yeah, I'm glad that they're trying to approach this from the angle that they're currently at. I think it's far
Mm,
more interesting.
yeah, I think so too. Something funny I loved in this chapter was when they're talking about Sylvia. Jasmine says she called me. Brett called her after the fire. She wanted to know what was happening from me, I guess. Verifying she's on her way, and it's so clear to me that Jasmine was about to say from an adult before realizing that that means that she doesn't really consider Brett an adult, and I guess she wanted to not definitively make that statement.
Well, and I like that this if effectively summarizes Brett's inclusion in this chapter too. He comes
Mm,
up again briefly later, but both times it's like this is a conversation that goes to so many places about what should happen with these girls, who they should talk to, what they can and can't do, and Brett's involvement essentially amounts to let's not involve him.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't, like I guess just in a chapter that I feel like is exploring or bringing to a head a lot of the ideas around what the boundaries or edges of parenting should and shouldn't be and what the various roles of parenting are. Like, there's never any consideration given to the idea that Brett is within any of those boundaries.
Mm,
Like, there's so many things a parent can and should be. None of them overlap with Brett. Those are two completely different circles on the Venn diagram.
mm, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I also like because there was a I don't know if we called it out, but in the chapter last week, 23.1, Sheridan had a remark where she was like, because Avery said they were able to go after Brett because he wasn't really family, and so Sheridan was like, "Oh, what? So I have to get your orange juice and be a good sister, or other people can kill me? Like you're effectively holding me family hostage."
Mhm.
And it was just one of those moments like, I don't think you understand how far down Brett is. Like Sheridan even at her worst, would need to keep up that level of energy for 2 years before she'd reach Brett's level, like, yeah.
Yeah. No, you got a long way down you could go if you really wanted Sheridan.
Yeah, like but, yeah, even at her worst, Sheridan was the one who supported Avery through coming out, like, she's so far ahead of yeah, anyway.
Mm.
Um, Also, just to throw it in here because I don't know where else to put it, but just like a shout out to Connor for how much he's just taking care of Kelsey in this chapter. Like we've been in his head, we know how much he cares for this woman, and it was just the way he's like he's constantly reminding her that she needs to eat and like fuel herself. And I think he gets her like 3 of the muffins she was eyeing at one point. Like
Mm.
it just, especially after we saw Snowdrop do the same thing to Avery recently, as
Yeah.
like it feels like a very easy shorthand for the story to be like partner forcing you to eat while you're emotionally drained. Good
Mm.
sort of energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's where Snowdrop gets it from Avery, who gets it from them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, they talk about the girls, and they talk about specifically like the situation in which Avery had actually died, what they would have done. Um, and yeah, just talking more about their relationship with the girls, and what their role should be.
Yeah, and because the lead into this is really interesting because they effectively lead into that topic by kind of reminiscing on what it was like to parent the girls when they were younger.
Yeah,
And there's this great conversation about how all 3 of them kind of bottled stuff in and it came out in different ways, and
yeah,
like is planting the seeds for Mrs. stuff later about how all 3 of them weren't in a good place when she found them, but um it just really made sense to me that it's like as you approach the conversation around what the fuck do we do now,
mm,
all 3 of them are like kind of reminiscing on what has and hasn't worked in the past, and also I guess giving consideration to like who the girls used to be. Like I know it's sort of like remembering why they do what they do, as well as what has and hasn't worked.
mm, yeah,
They
yeah,
also so they talk a lot about all the good the Kenneteers are doing, like which I think comes back to what we were saying about how well rounded this is. Like
mm,
this chapter really goes out of its way to make sure that we know this isn't just some snap parental controlling decision. Like there's a lot of time put into here to like Connor and Jasmine very specifically are like, we don't disagree with what the girls are fighting for. Like they're
mm,
absolutely achieving good. That's important.
yeah,
Um, and I think I just think it's important that the chapter took the time to address things like that to make the parents as they're making this decision are sitting there and saying we see the good too. We just see the whole picture, and like that gives the like decisions they make at the end of this have so much more weight that they're not just like they're not just being brats.
mm. Yeah, they're recognizing. I think Kelsey, yeah, as you said, kind of says something along the lines of like, "I agree 100% with what they're doing, but just I wish it wasn't them." You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like, or even then, it's just like we're fine with it up until a point. Like there's always so much involvement kids their age should have in a
yeah,
war like this is effectively their thing. Like they don't disagree with what they're doing. They disagree with the fact that these girls are straight up calling it a war and getting shot.
yeah,
And it's a super reasonable take.
yeah, definitely. And they have this bit where they're talking about the possibility of Verona having and the other kids having sex, which I think is really interesting to include because like the core of this conversation is like, are they children and we are responsible for shielding them from harm, or are they adults and responsible for their own decisions? And
Mm,
I think Connor says something like that, later they're teenagers and they go between those two states.
I really like that.
Yeah, for sure. And so just like, yeah, yeah, they are thinking of themselves more and more as adults, especially given the like big decisions that they're making and how kind of I don't know, I guess maturely they're taking responsibility for improving the world around them. But they're 14, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Should they? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's
Um
so good. It's just such a
yeah,
good layered question.
Sorry. Yeah, I think the sexual activity part of that conversation is also really important because it kind of, you're right, that brings it into the more mundane side of things where it's like, this is just addressing the overall question of how do we treat them as adults? Like, I think that's such a good pull. The idea that
Mm,
like that's the real world equivalent, but it's kind of the same thing. Like whether it's about your kids being sexually active or them engaging in a magical war, the question is 14 old enough to be doing that?
mm,
And like this is one of those moments. So I'm like, this 100% has to be why Wildbow made the Kenneteers the age 13, 14, because that I think that has to be the age where this question is the most difficult. Like if the Kenneteers were like 15, 16, it feels like they're so much closer to adults that it becomes a bit easier to push in that direction. If they're like preteens, that feels more kiddie. Like 13, 14, I think would be the age where I'm like, it gets the hardest to put down any kind of blanket rule because there's so much variability in kids at that age.
Mm.
So, like, to me, it almost feels like this is what Wildbow was leading up to the whole time when he made them 13. It's just like
Yes.
this is,
This exact thing. Yeah.
yeah, like this is the hardest age to answer these questions, so it makes it the hardest for the parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like Verona is in particular, like to zoom in on her, she's a very interesting case study for everything this chapter's talking about, and I think that's why she gets a lot of attention in this section, even though none of her parents are here.
Mm.
Because like it's absolutely clear that she has thrived in the last handful of months since ditching the idea of parents. Basically, like she dove into Kennet Below in Arc 14, and she's made this domain and started living there by herself.
Mm.
And that both of those kind of fly in the face of what I would expect to be okay parenting wise. Like I think any parent who would let their kid just dive into Can It Below unsupervised or get a domain like this, I'd have questions about why they're allowing that. Like I think it's all a bit shaky. But then you can't argue with the fact that Verona is in a much better place now after having done those things than she was when she had quote unquote parents. And I mean, we'll get to see Verona's own thoughts about wanting parents in the next chapter, but like I think Verona raises really interesting questions about what a parent should be. Like there are so many aspects to being a parent. There's like it's not just about being a tyrant unless you're Brett, but like a parent is also somebody who, aside from like trying to control things to keep you safe, they give you advice. They should be like an emotional kind of confidant to, they're an emotional support as well as somebody who can give advice. Like there's a bunch of these things that they can do, and Verona is a really interesting character to explore. Can you have some of those without the other? Like, should you have some of them without the other? Would it be helpful now for Verona that she's found some stability to have someone kind of with the potential to say no to stuff that she wants to do? Like, there's, yeah,
Mm.
the like more so than any of the other characters, Verona, I think, really shatters this image of a parent as a whole unit and addresses each aspect of what a parent is in very different ways.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree with you. And it's interesting. Verona has kind of built that a bit for herself with like the hooligans playing part of that role, and Sylvia playing part of that role, and Connor and Kelsey and Jasmine playing part of that role. But it's not the same, is it?
No, like she's definitely missing that emotional confidant part, and that's clearly the part that she wants.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, there's the question of whether you can have can you have a parent who takes the responsibility of being your emotional confidant and supporting you emotionally and all that, but you don't give them any ability to sort of veto you doing something dangerous, because that feels kind of unfair. Like
Mm.
that's effective. I mean, that's effectively being a Brett, right? Like Brett gives you all the responsibility of being his emotional support, but doesn't let you do anything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, I'm interested to see where this goes with Verona, because there's so much to the idea of parenting has been so poisoned in her world that it's kind of been fully deconstructed. I'm so interested to see how she's reconstructing it.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Something to keep an eye on, I guess. I think next chapter there'll be more to say about this when Verona really
Yeah,
sees what the parents have done. I think it's quite an interesting conversation to revisit.
yeah.
Um,
It's just I know this chapter really highlighted for me how much this story has been exploring the ways there are like a lot of jobs and parts to being a parent, and they're all really complexly intermingled, and it's very hard to separate them. And yeah, I don't know. It's
mm,
just so fun the way all of those threads are really coming together in this chapter.
yeah. Um, so yeah, the parents set their non-negotiables and start to plan what they can actually do to get to that point. Um,
Yeah.
this is the juicy stuff. So there are three that they set, right? There's the girls can't continue to be in such danger, like them having magic is okay, but not fighting in a war.
Fair.
Yep. Sylvia needs to be in the know, or Verona needs to be living with her mother. She needs to have an active parent in to some extent, right?
Yeah. I Arguably fair. I think that one's more grey, which is fun.
Hmm. And Lucy doesn't belong to war, and I realize I put that lowercase, but it's a capital W there in the text, right?
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
guess to
interesting.
to zoom in on each of these, because I think each warrants a bit of conversation. Well, except
Yes.
maybe the first one. The girls
The
can't
first
continue
one
to
is
be in
pretty
danger.
straightforward. Yeah, I think there was something there was a line this chapter I think from Kelsey that really stood out to me of like, I can rationalize what the girls are doing, what Avery's doing with the paths is like, oh, she's into
Rock
surfing or rock
climbing.
climbing or something, right? And by the way, surfing, is that dangerous anyway?
I I used to surf, and I don't. Well, I used to surf and I used to rock climb, and I would have put rock
Yeah.
climbing way ahead of surfing on the danger
Yeah.
list.
Anyway, doing paths is like she's into free climbing or something,
Sure.
whatever. That can be rationalized, but fighting a war is not something that can be rationalized. I mean, the rationalization is she's going off to war.
What? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Like, nah, no thanks.
yeah. Like I would be very fascinated to hear from the person who thinks they can, in good faith, argue why that this first point is not okay from the parents.
Mm,
Because I think it's so incredibly reasonable. Like Kelsey also brings up the point where she's like, I think engaging in this war is slowly poisoning our kids. And like a
mm,
handful of chapters ago, Lucy had a dream where she couldn't even remember the name of all the names of all the people whose deaths she feels responsible for. So like, yes, like
mm.
Kelsey's bang on. Like there is an emotional toll that the Kennedys, I don't think, are fully aware of yet. That's adding up from being involved in this, and I think the parents are spot on.
Yeah, for sure. Um, how do you feel about Sylvia needing to be in the know slash Verona living with her mum?
I'm pro, but I would be much more willing to entertain arguments against it than I would have been for the last one.
Mm,
Like I think this one is admittedly more grey, even if I think I do agree with the idea of Verona needing a parent for certain definitions of what the responsibilities of a parent are. I think that's the fun thing about saying Verona needs a parent is there's or as we just were talking about, there's so many aspects to parenting that you could mean in that. There are some parts that I think Verona definitely does not need given her history, but there are some that I think she needs, and
mm,
she explores that for herself. But yeah,
yeah,
I mean, in the next chapter, it kind of seems like she was looking into this anyway. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And Lucy doesn't belong to war.
I think this is the most fun one
I think so too.
because I had never considered the idea that as Lucy was becoming more and more close to the dogs and becoming one of them, that was symbolic of her becoming more and more associated with war. And in retrospect, it sounds so dumb to say that because that's so obvious. But
Mm,
like, I love that Jasmine was the one to point out to us. It's like, no, no, no. There is still a part of my daughter in there, the one who had like the little, hearts on her overalls or
mm,
whatever, and I need that part of my daughter to be with me. Like I can't lose all that to war, and that's an exceedingly fair take.
yeah, totally. The fact that Lucy is so confidently fighting these battles for justice, like she's effectively, becoming a freedom fighter or whatever, right? Like,
Mm.
and Jasmine wants a life for her where she's not just fighting all the time, which is so fair.
Yeah, and like this has been Jasmine's thing. Like a refrain we've had from Jasmine since she became aware is Jasmine's like, I didn't want this for you. Like everything Jasmine didn't want was a daughter who was at war with the world. And I guess Lucy's kind of always been a little bit like that. So I think what's really fun about this non-negotiable in a way is I think to a degree Jasmine had lost that battle well before the story started,
Mm,
and she's going to maybe have to compromise to some degree with Lucy on this because I think war is always going to be a part of Lucy's life now. Like it already was at the start of the story.
mm,
So like Jasmine really focuses in on she wants the happy times with Lucy or whatever, and I think that's what she's. It's going to be interesting to see how she can fight with Lucy for that ability to make sure war doesn't totally consume Lucy, but there's some sort of balance found there.
mm, yeah, yeah, um,
Um,
yeah.
Jumping back, I'm curious. With this, Sylvia needs to know, or Verona needs to be living with her mother. Do you have any preference for which one of those options it is?
Yeah, Awakening Sylvia, which is way
Yeah,
more fun.
I agree. I get like as a reader, it's impossible not to be like, well, we can't have Verona move to Thunder Bay. She has to just aware
Mm,
Sylvia.
yeah, yeah. I yeah. I guess let's talk about that next chapter, right? Because that's when we're tackling that question more specifically. Um,
Yeah, sure.
but yeah, then there's this other bit where they talk about Grumble and that's still a way that they're actively failing Avery. And I'm like I thought this was a really interesting conversation, but I'm struggling to pin it to the wider conversation about the kids here and like figure out what we're taking from it. You know, what was your read on this?
The thing that jumped out to me is this comes up right after Jasmine mentions that they can only control the Kenneteers until they're 18, technically. Like, once they're adults, they can't limit the Kenneteers. And I think Grumble is a really interesting way to zoom out on like age as an aspect of this conversation, because it's essentially like we're talking about parenting the elderly now. So it's like it's still about parenting, but this is the aspect of the conversation, I guess, where we take age kind of out of the equation, and it's like Grumble is an adult, but then he's also dependent on his family in a number of ways. It's like, I don't know, like he's well over 18, so he should be entitled to make his own decisions. But then obviously these guys all sit here and decide pretty unilaterally to limit his ability to watch whatever they call Fox News in the otherverse.
Mm,
So I think it's like it adds to the conversation in that we're talking about the idea of parenting other adults. Like it makes it less about the parents being like, these kids are only 14 and they can't take care of themselves, and it's more like zooming in on like, if you're in a position to do this to someone regardless of their age, should you do it?
yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because yeah, like Grumble isn't a kid, but they effectively have the power to parent him. So
Yes.
even though he's not a kid, they're going to do it because I mean this is interesting because I doubt many people were against the idea of them doing this to Grumble. Like Connor's sort of like, yeah, I guess we'll take away his Fox News, and I was
Mm,
like, yeah, I mean, good. Like I'm kind of happy to say it's not a valid choice to choose like just hate like that. Especially with Avery in the house. But obviously that's a little different to what's going on with the Kenneteers. So it's easier to get on board with them cutting Grumble off, but it raises the point of yeah, I know, just parenting regardless of age.
yeah. Yeah. And I guess there's a dynamic to it as well of like if it was Grumble living by himself, you know, it's one thing, but the problem is that it's well, I don't know, maybe. The problem is really to a large extent like the impact that it's having on the kids, right? Like
Yeah, that's a good point. But
not
yeah,
not entirely that, but yeah.
yeah, no, but that ties into what's going on with the Kenneteers too, because like
Yeah.
Avery, her siblings all just went through the ringer as well because she was disappeared for a few days. So like that's also relevant to what we're talking about with the Kenneteers. Is like this is something that is seeping into their lives and that will affect the people around them.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
Um
I also, sorry, I just really wanted to call out. I really liked the detail of it's really Jasmine who kind of steps up and is pretty insistent that Connor try to handle this thing with Grumble. Like she does, she just take that step back a couple times and be like, "Look, I can't tell you how to run your family," but like she's pretty adamant that they really should sort it for Avery's sake. And I guess it jumped out to me as like an important detail because like Jasmine is black, same as Lucy. So she's been on the receiving end of this kind of hate as much as her protecting the girls from this kind of hate comes just as much from experience as it does for like caring about them.
mm,
Whereas like Connor and Kelsey are kind of extraordinarily not gay. So they only come from that place of caring and less experience, which made it easier for them to not appreciate how big a deal this kind of is.
mm, yeah.
So yeah, I don't like that. Just seemed like a nice little detail. That way, yeah, Jasmine is one of those people who, yeah, coming from a place where she can see that this is a
Yeah.
problem. I mean, it's classic Lucy. She spoke up because it was a problem.
Yeah. 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 It's good stuff by Jasmine. Fighting the battles for people. um, so yeah, the parents are then kind of forced to consider the question of how much are we willing to harm our own relationships with our children in order to keep them safe for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and again, I love that it was Kelsey who kind of
Mm,
brings this up, fulfilling her Verona role within the trio.
yeah. Um, yeah, you're right. More evidence that she's the Verona of the gang. I think it's really nice to hear Jasmine say that she thinks Lucy would pick her over Magic. Like, I think that's true, and it's obviously a very messed up situation if it comes to that. But yeah,
Yeah, it's almost worse in a way, like, the way Jasmine's like, "Yeah, she would pick me, and she'd fucking hate me for it."
Mm,
It's like, that's almost more painful. But yeah, I agree, I think Jasmine's bang on. Like, 100% Lucy would choose her mom, and I think Avery would choose her family over Magic too. It would just suck if they had to.
mm, yeah, yeah, for sure. So we jump back in time next. The parents have just found out, and they're going to confront Miss with Jasmine definitely in the lead there.
I was so fucking hyped when this like,
Yeah.
I have been low key mad since Arc 17 ended that this confrontation happened off screen.
Mm,
So the fact that we finally got to see it and there was kind of a reason for why it was held off till now was so good.
mm,
This is also, I think, where we see Jasmine at her most Luciest. Like, she just fucking lays into Miss, and Miss tries to dodge the questions, and Jasmine is having none of it.
mm.
Um, and it she felt so much like Lucy in this, where she was just hounding someone and not taking evasive bullshit.
Yeah, there was quite a uncomfortable feeling as Jasmine like
Oh yeah,
keeps chasing Miss and refusing to acknowledge that like she
can't.
can't face her. Yeah, it
Yeah.
really it was unsettling, wasn't it? In a way that like I can't fault anyone for that situation. It just felt very strange and kind of violating.
Yeah, and like you can chalk that up a bit to like the awareness being very new to this world still, and like not knowing. Like, I do, to Jasmine's credit, despite how angry she is, I think she gets a bit better about it when she realizes that she's kind of uh, uh, moving in on somebody with like the equivalent of a disability essentially.
Mm,
Um so yeah, like, it skirts around being kind of shitty, this pressure they put on Miss, but like, I mean, also she's rightfully extraordinarily angry. So I don't know.
mm,
I do think that it's funny. Like, Jasmine definitely shares that like Lucy-ish lack of patience for this can it found stuff. Like, there's just a number of moments both before this argument with Miss and off and during it where like when Miss tries to be evasive or is talking in a bunch of metaphors, Jasmine like often is just like, oh, fucking get to the point. Like,
mm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. um, can we talk about this when Connor says when Miss is talking about like the kids were going to be lost, there were going to be horrible situations, etc., etc., and Connor asks, "You can't pass on a message and let us know." And I think this is a really interesting question that Connor raises that never really gets answered because like Miss notices these lost children and her response is to use them, right? But there is another option, which is kind of help them get back to humanity. And it's maybe Miss didn't have the necessary understanding of humans and empathy to do that at that time, but like
Yeah.
that was an option as well, right?
There's an argument to be made that like, what is she just meant to do that forever and not really fix the problem? Like,
Yeah,
that's constantly doing
yeah,
patched up. Like, she talks about how her plan for Kennett was to make it a place where being aware was less of a problem.
mm,
Um, and so, like, in a way, she was trying to address the problem in a bigger picture way. It's sort of the vibe of how she. I think the other thing she brings up is like, she does mention the Kennett others weren't really doing this from a position of privilege. They were drowning in a lot of ways as much as the Kennetteers. Like, they were reaching out for help as much as they were trying to use the Kennetteers. And she's really good about like taking accountability and not shying away from kind of some of the injustices she committed doing this.
mm,
But I think it's fair to say that it's like yeah, I don't, the Candid others did this from a position of like they were in trouble as well, and there were plans to use this to make the town or the world a better place. So
mm,
it's like, yeah, there's a quote, and I don't have it here, and I wish I did. Where like Miss talks about how there were 100 reasons she picked them, each with their own justices and injustices, and I really liked that way of explaining it. I thought that rang very true.
mm, mm, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, like, you definitely get the vibe that Miss is doing her best, and but also the parents' frustration is totally fair. Like,
Yeah.
there's this horrible situation that's happening, and the Kennetteers would want to help with it, but Miss is still using them to get to that end. Like, I don't know.
I think that's the really fun crux of the controversy of everything going on in this chapter is like I kind of feel like both sides are right in a
Yeah,
lot of ways.
yeah,
Like, I really struggle to come down hard on Miss for everything she's done because so much of it was needed. in a lot of ways and has kind of worked out well. But then also, yeah, you can't really fault the parents for being like, fucking our kids, you chose our kids to use like this, go fuck yourself. Like that's
Yeah.
yeah. And like Miss makes it really hard, I think, for Jasmine to argue with her because she's just so good at taking accountability for stuff here. Like I don't know, I remember we saw Toad Swallow when he first stepped down as mayor start to be pretty good about like being responsible for the bad things he'd done in his past, and I think Miss outshines him on that front in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So then we jump back to the present, and the parents are going to confront Miss again, this time with more of a plan. They first weigh up their options, including the drastic options that would really hurt the Kennett others, and then propose one last chance, to which the council agrees.
This is yeah. I mean, this is so good. We'll just have to get into it, I guess. It's such a
Um,
great ultimatum.
yeah. Well, first, it's worth noting the council here is the gang. Louise and Matthew are back. The ghouls are back. Rook is not here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance she just couldn't make it.
Mhm.
I don't know.
What even is Rook out of Kennet? Like, what's happened?
Yeah, forget can we talk about the girls?
Yeah,
This
can we talk
needs to be
about
can we
Rook?
talk about Rook?
Yeah.
Because I feel like we've been saying that for like 6 arcs now though. Like it's just getting ridiculous how much Kenneth is not talking about Rook. They're still on the promenade at the end of this chapter. So at this point my hope is that 23.3 is going to open with a lot of conversations including somebody hopefully finally fucking bringing up Rook.
Yeah. One day. Yeah. So yeah, well, first of all, I think it's very funny. There's this bit where Kelsey says, "You owe us, and we deserve to not be the bad guys here. We're offering you one." One girl? Matthew asked, frowning. Can you imagine if they were just like, "We're going to take Avery and Lucy, they're our children, and you can keep and adopt Verona and
Yeah.
use her for your war."
Verona didn't have any good parents anyway, so you can have
So yeah,
that
you
one.
can have her. You can do whatever you want with her, and we'll take our kids back. Thank you. Oh, that'd
I
be so
thought
fucking funny.
I thought they were offering them the choice as well. Yeah, I was so glad Matthew asked that because I was confused by the phrasing. Like I read, "We're offering you one." I was like, "One what?"
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
Matthew's like, "One girl," and it's like, "Yeah, I guess." Um, yeah. I mean, if you had to pick one Kenneteer to keep for this war, like say the parents were giving them their choice of Kenneteer,
Mhm.
which one do you think the Kennet others should pick?
Hmm.
Because I have an answer
I
to
think
this.
Lucy,
Yeah, same. If I had
right?
to pick, I'd pick Lucy.
Yeah.
I think
Oh, maybe Verona. Oh, yeah. I could see a cases for all of them. That's the
yeah,
thing, though.
they're all the most powerful in their own way. But I mean, if we're leading into this just being a war,
Mm,
hard to look past Lucy.
yeah.
Verona's tempting because her capacity to swoop in with big swings is extremely powerful.
But then also, like, Avery's ability to be mobile and also ensure
Just
that you have a constant kind of set of supports that are
yeah,
actively building up. Like,
or come out of nowhere with big magnets. Like
yeah, yeah, true, true. Yeah, yeah, interesting. Um,
anyway, they don't get a decision that tough. Luckily, they
no,
get a pretty easy
that would
proposal.
be a fun discussion question, actually. Maybe we should think about that. Um, but yeah, so their proposal is one last chance to fuck over Charles before the girls are done from the war, right? Like, and it's very interesting because it felt very like heavy and kind of wrong to me when I first read the chapter. But on reread, like, it's very fair. Like,
Mm,
what else can the parents do? I think it's yeah, I think it's a
it,
very fair choice.
I think it's both. I think that's what's fun about it. Is this
Yes,
is
yes,
incredibly heavy and kind of crossing a line, but also I can't help but back it. It just makes
yeah,
sense. Yeah, like it's yeah.
yeah.
It's such
Um,
a good, controversial, heavy hitting moment. I love it.
Yeah. And the other thing that is worth noting here is this time, Elliot, we're definitely 100% heading towards the end of the story. You can feel it coming.
Yeah, I've never felt this feeling before, but now I'm feeling it for the first time. It feels like we're heading to the end of
This
Pale.
time, this time. Yeah, no, I really like, I do love the idea of like, we've got one big last shot. Like, I just think that's
Mm,
such a cool setup. Like, it adds some
yeah.
stakes in such a fun way. I just think it's really awesome.
Classic Otherverse really is coming up with an in-story reason why Because that's just a more hype. Like it's
Yes.
more hype for the story for them to be like, this is our final chance. And so of course in the other verse there had to be also an in text reason why it is that. Like yeah,
Yeah.
and this is such a fun angle for it to be that. Like the idea that it is just the parents putting down an ultimatum. Like that's just I wouldn't have expected that to be the driver of such a big story moment, but it is, and it just works. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I I also think this is interesting because it opens up some interesting avenues for Pale to potentially end along, and like the fact that these were my first thoughts means that it's probably not likely because I'm never right about that sort of thing. But like Pale never really felt like a story where we would just win at the end and everything would be hunky dory better forever now.
Mm.
And there's an interesting angle to consider here, like where if the Kennedys win this final confrontation, but not in like a conclusive way, the story could almost end on this note that the war is continuing and they're just not in it. Like that would actually
Mm.
be a very interesting way for the story to end.
Mm. I can't imagine that's how the story will go, though.
It would be unfulfilling in a lot of ways, but also could be like I can almost see this winning, but I don't know, not in a final way. So it's like there's an aspect of the war still going. I don't know. I'm
Mm.
fascinated by this idea of this hinting at an ending that's less like win or lose and more because Pales never felt like it would end at the end of the fight. Like there will still be some sort of they're not going to fix the whole world, right? So no matter how this story ends, there's going to be a sense of the work continues, I guess.
Yeah.
And this could lead to interesting new angles on how to give us that vibe.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know. But yeah, I really love because to just talk about the proposal, like bringing up the idea of forswearing them because of these awakening oaths is absolutely like it's just kind of a dick move. But also, like, what else are the parents meant to do? I think this is what's so fun is like this is the one piece of leverage they found. And in fact, it's actually because Kelsey's a genius that they even think to use this.
Mm.
And it's so I can't decide whether I love or hate it because like uh, the Kennet or the Awarants are very clear that they're like we don't want to be enemies with you like to the Kennet
Yeah.
others. They're like we want to work with you, but they kind of do that from the position of like holding a shotgun to their heads. Like
Yeah.
they open with, "Hey, we can do this,
Well, they need
but we
to.
want to be friends."
They kind of need to
Yeah.
demonstrate that
Oh,
they're serious, right? Like that's the reason for it.
exactly. Like, yeah, I can't really fault them for feeling like they needed to do that, but it just creates the weirdest energy about it to start with. Until I think Miss kind of calms that down with her sort of saying, "Yeah, it seems like a fair request."
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
the Kennett others kind of agree to it very readily because it seems so fair to them.
yeah, like I think that's what's so interesting about this is I think it is a fair request from the parents, just using a tool that it feels shitty that they used. But then what better way to kind of, like that is also what the Kenneteers have been doing. Like the last few arcs, as this has turned into a war, the Kenneteers have more and more been doing stuff where they're like, "Ugh, in an ideal world, we wouldn't kill the Alabaster or whatever, but we're needing to cross these lines to succeed." And it feels like the Kennet parents are just doing the same thing here.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, and like I just in terms of like from a story thing, like the idea that it's the awakening oaths that are the thing being used to close this off here is just so fun. Like those awakening oaths have been so important the whole story, and to see them used in a kind of dickhead way like this is just so good.
Yeah. Yeah. So 23.2, we're
Yeah.
in Verona's head. Verona heads home to pick over the burned remains of her childhood, and there isn't much there worth saving.
No, some even more stuff that isn't worth saving is going to arrive in a little bit, but for now
It's pretty
it's just
mean
the
to
empty
talk about
house.
Macaulay like that, but all right.
Yeah, that's definitely who I was thinking of.
Yeah, she's not worth
Yeah.
saving. Verona's already saved her, so I don't know if I
Yeah, I
agree with
guess.
that. But yeah, it's fun to get. I mean, it's a haunted house, right? Like that's the vibe. And Verona is looking through the ghosts of this house, and kind of each one has its own little abusive memory of her dad. It's good times. It's good times.
Yeah, there's definitely a vibe in this section of like the metaphor is kind of thin where Verona is here to clean up and salvage what she can from that chapter of her life. Like I think mentally in a lot of ways she had moved on from this house and this life already a while ago. But now that it's burnt down, she's back here salvaging what she can, deciding what she wants to keep and what she wants to throw away. But ultimately, this is like a physical embodiment of Verona sort of saying, I am done with the part of my life where I was a kid and had a
Mm,
parent,
yeah.
which is a very loaded image to come into from the previous chapter.
Yeah, exactly. It's yeah, yeah. It's so interesting the way these two chapters play off of each other.
Well, and especially because there is still a sense of loss here. Like what I found really compelling about this section was like as you said, there's a lot of shit here. Like Verona pulls out the like I Heart Vancouver towel, and it's the towel that was central to this argument we've heard a lot about, where Brett was upset that she forgot his birthday and chucked a 4-year-old tantrum about it. And so like she sees this towel, and she's like, I don't fucking want this. But there are also like a lot of little moments she keeps bringing up. Like there
Yes.
and this is something Mrs. or maybe it was Matt. Someone talked to her in the past about the idea that it's like she's moved out of it, but this is still kind of her childhood home, and like,
Mm,
yeah, like this is just a metaphor for Verona's childhood. Like she's kind of left it behind or whatever, but that a lot of her came from this, and there are little bits and pieces that she still treasures. And so, as much as you feel these moments where she picks up like the towel and is like, well, fuck that, I don't want anything to do with it. There are also these really great little moments that are like, oh, this was a nice memory.
mm, yeah. Um,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like sorry, you
Well,
go.
I'll touch on that. I was going to touch on it a bit more in a second, but we do get like it's really interesting. We get a neighbor shows up, and the hooligans are here, and Verona's kind of deflecting this neighbor who's curious. But then we get these like positive memories from Oakham, like this fun birthday party, and it kind of demonstrates to me that the memories of this house are so tainted by Brett, obviously, by the past few years with Brett. But there actually was at one point happiness here.
Yeah,
Verona was happy here at one point.
yeah, like it seems like the family was more or less happy until a handful of years ago. So yeah, like there is that's what's mixed into this. Is as much as there's shit and abuse, there's also like there were happy parts, and I do think this is a chapter that is Verona kind of flexing a lot on how much she's grown in this story, because like her ability to come here and kind of very maturely go through this house and pick the pieces and go, I don't want this, I do want this, like that. If we're talking about that as a metaphor for how she's treating, the part of her life where she lived in this house, like it's really impressive that she's kind of able to process it in that way. Like she's here consciously sorting through the remnants she doesn't want to keep, and that's a far cry from the girl who in chapter 1.1 decided not to bring her childhood toy to the awakening ritual but scissors instead, because she wanted to not have ties to her childhood. Like she'd
Mm,
given up at that point. Now she's
yeah,
grown to the point where she can kind of process just process it. Whereas she wasn't able
yeah,
to before, and now she can. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, what's the deal with this neighbor?
Yeah.
She
It's a bit
just
of a
shows up.
sticky beak, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the vibe that it got from me is just like demonstrating how annoying the like mundane suburban life is and how much it grates on Verona, I guess. Although she does pretty
Yeah.
well of like not reacting negatively to this as I would just tell this neighbor to butt out.
Yeah. I was feeling the same thing. Like this lady kept talking to her, and I was like, "Oh my god, go away!" Like,
Mm,
I thought it was funny as well that this lady is clearly very upset by Mal's tattoos. Um, which, to be fair, we don't get clarification on whether she's upset by the concept of tattoos or by Mal's shit tier tattoos. But like Verona, the first thing Verona comments on this lady when she shows up is like Verona comments on like the shade of her skin maybe being like alcoholic related.
mm,
And so I just thought like there was a lot of judgment going both ways from this interaction too. Like it was just from the get go, there was just the nothing positive in this interaction.
mm,
So yeah, a lot of people are saying yeah, like it's the fact that it's a 14-year-old that tattoos. It's like yes, that's the sensible assumption, but we don't know that it's not that Mal's tattoos just suck. Is all I'm saying.
mm.
Maybe this lady would appreciate it if Mal had good tattoos.
Maybe.
Probably not, but maybe.
Maybe this lady needs to help Mal get her tattoo gun that she's looking for. Um,
Yeah, sorry, going back to what you're saying about Oakham,
yeah.
I did want to call out like I think that's a really important part of why the hooligans are here with her. Like, especially we're going to get into Macaulay a bunch. But the hooligans are a really interesting vehicle for Verona to vocalize all the ways she has matured and the ways that she is moving on from this house. Like,
Mm,
it's really fun having them here. And not Lucy and Verona. Like, as Brett brings up, Lucy and Verona aren't the ones here because this is very much about Verona moving on, and these guys are kind of what she's moved on to. And so, like seeing how she bounces off of them as she's working through this process of fully saying goodbye to the house is really fun.
yeah, yeah. I think the conversation between Verona and Macaulay is really interesting, right? Like the Macaulay's vibe of kind of struggling to conceptualize her place outside of her family now, and the way that Verona is trying to kind of bring positives out of Macaulay's horrible abusive family past is so interesting. Like that's what
Mm.
kind of what Oakham is doing to Verona here, and that's what Verona is doing to Macaulay. It's just like a really interesting set of friendliness that this group has.
Yeah, and I think like those are all parallels to what Verona is going through, right? Like she is in the process of finally saying goodbye to this house and embracing this life that she's sort of defined for herself. That includes all these guys. So like when we talk about like Macaulay, I think like there's a big parallel here. I think Verona used to express back in like Arcs 12 and so not feeling worthy of certain things or feeling like, she was broken emotionally. Uh, and I felt like the way Macaulay talked about feeling like she was shitty and didn't deserve these nice things kind of echoed some of those previous sentiments from Verona. So, like, while Verona is here kind of processing and packing away this old chapter in her life, we also have Macaulay bring stuff up like this so Verona can also express why this new life is better. Like Verona can sort of demonstrate that she now feels like she's worthy of good stuff and she can help other people get there, and that's obviously better than where she used to be.
Yeah, yeah. It's nice. It's nice that they're supporting each other so much.
Yeah. Well, and like I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the notes, but like
Mm,
the other conversation that she has with Macaulay, aside from all the Anselm stuff, is like Verona does kind of apologize that Macaulay had to do some of her screaming in the chapel,
mm,
because that's not the path she wanted to go down for herself. And there's talk of where else Macaulay might go, but like maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but Verona also uses the term screaming to describe some of her interactions with her dad. So I thought there was maybe intentionally meant to be a bit of a link between, like, Verona thinks on the time she started screaming at her dad and how that kind of signified the point where things went downhill in a way that couldn't come back, which I don't know if that's fair. I think shit was already fucked, but like by the time it reached the point where her and her dad were happy to just yell at each other and scream at each other,
mm,
that was when you had to accept that things had gone too far and weren't going to turn around. And so there's like a parallel there to like Macaulay is trying to avoid being that person in a practice sense. Like she doesn't want to be this person who screams and calls on war.
yeah,
And so like, yeah, again, it's just another example of Verona sort of trying to help coach or working alongside Macaulay to make sure they don't backslide in these ways.
yeah. Um, what do you think? What do you think of? What do you think Macaulay's practice is going to be? you know.
I I hope I don't know. I kind of hope she gets to turn into one of those practitioners who just doesn't have to do it. Like I don't know, you know what I mean?
Mm,
Like because there's other things you could do with the dancing or whatever, but maybe she's just like I don't know, maybe she just works for the ballet and she's just practice is a hobby for her.
mm,
Like yeah,
mm,
maybe the answer is just not even being a practitioner. I don't know.
yeah, yeah, maybe.
It feels like she's so dance oriented. Dance is going to have to be a big part of her life, but I don't know.
Yes, yeah. We'll see. I suppose. Um, Yeah, so speaking of Macaulay, Macaulay kind of awkwardly segues to the topic of Anselm,
Yeah,
and how she wants to get in on Verona's action.
yeah. I
Uh,
the best part of this is absolutely when they call up Anselm to talk to him, and he responds, "I wasn't listening in," which is, and Verona just thinks to herself, "That is so much more suspicious than anything else you could have said."
mhm.
I just really enjoyed that was the energy he brought into this conversation as he
Yeah,
entered.
yeah. Um, So, what do you think? I mean, it's Macaulay awkwardly segues into it, but Verona clearly is kind of navigating the situation with real maturity. I really hope
Yeah.
this doesn't become too much to navigate. Like, there is definitely a worry that it's gonna just become too complex.
Yeah, but like it's another one of those things where like Verona is just kind of it feels like flexing on how mature she is right now because she even
Yeah,
brings that
totally.
up. Like she's like, "Yeah, look, this good odds this will get messy. Let's just keep those lines of communication open." Yeah, and I mean she even brings up at one point it's like if her and Anselm become a couple and that's what the two of them need and that's what makes them happy. Like she'll be a little ticked off, but like, she'll let them go do that. Like, she's not going to stand in the way of them or whatever for her own bullshit. So yeah, I don't know. What's really fun is this conversation is immediately prefaced by Verona commenting on how annoying it is that she lost all these clothes because buying clothes for someone of her fit is really hard. And I felt like that was definitely like the subtext of that was being like she struggled to find a guy who she's compatible with
Mm.
because they all keep catching feelings and stuff. So it's like it's a little bit annoying if Macaulay's going to take that, like if they end up catching feelings for each other, or whatever. So it's like, yeah, not nothing. Like it'd be annoying, but she's sort of like I could handle it. And yes, it's just the way she focuses on keeping communication open. I was like, I don't know, seems like a good sign to me.
Yeah,
Like even if it goes south, it's presumably not going to do it in an explosive way.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I think definitely. Yeah. Um.
Like I guess just compared to, I remember, obviously when her and Jeremy were a thing, I think we used to get in a lot of arguments with our audience about how that was all going down. But it's like the difference here for me is like with Jeremy, that clearly was never going to work. Like Jeremy clearly had
Yes.
feelings the whole
Yes.
time, and it's
Yeah.
like, and it felt like Verona was intentionally being manipulative to get what she wanted, and this is very much not that. Like she's just encouraging good, healthy communication, and that like you can't argue with that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Jeremy was never going to be successful. Like a successful transition of, you know, uh, what Jeremy wanted it from a relationship to what Verona wanted from a relationship.
Yeah. Whereas
Yeah.
here, they're all coming in with these expectations that this is what it is to start with, and we're just going to communicate if it becomes not that.
Mm,
Whereas with Jeremy, it very much started with it's clearly not that, but maybe we can try and force it to be.
yeah.
And that was that was just a bad plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a haunted house without a ghost. So in comes Brett.
Ah, this guy, man, like I was just in awe at his ability to make everything about himself in this chapter. Like, truly, it's
Yeah.
impressive.
He is. It's wild. It's wild. he really. He really. It's crazy how much he can go under the bar, even as it gets lower and lower and lower. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Um. I.
Oh,
I don't.
sorry, just coming off the back of 23.a, which was the chapter really cementing like that this story is wrapping up its exploration of what it means to be a parent, and we're really hitting the climax of that. And we didn't involve Brett in that chapter, and then he comes into this chapter and just reminds us fucking why. Like he's doing everything we complimented the other parents on doing last chapter. He manages to do the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Brett tries to exercise control over her, and she just refuses.
Yeah.
Series wrap on Brett. Do we think?
I I hope Verona gets it. Like how Verona is trying to coax him into chatting to her and her mom together. I kind of hope we get to see something along those lines, but I don't know. It could be a series wrap on Brett.
Mm,
But I almost hope that there is a bit more of a. I don't know. I think like as she moves closer to her mom or whatever, there'd be. It would make sense to me that there's a bit more Brett, so we could kind of continue to dunk on him and close that arm off.
yeah. Yeah.
It definitely, you're right though. This is like a big emotional wrap on Brett. Like there's a lot of stuff in Verona's thing where she's done,
Mm,
and she's been in some ways she's been done for a long time, but it feels like this is the last olive branch she plans to extend to him. Like she tries here, she's trying. She even says to herself, "If you'd been less of a dick, like I would have thought about extending you the same thing I'm planning to extend to mom." Like yeah, you're right. Like it feels like Verona gave Brett his last chance for her, in this chapter, and he failed it, so she's emotionally checked out.
Yep, fair enough.
Oh yeah. Um, I mean, like, I have to admit, there were moments where, like, Brett talks about how he has no emotional support, and it's like, oh, it's great that you have emotional support, and I don't have any. And like, there's an aspect to that where I'm just like, oh, I do feel kind of sad for Brett that he doesn't have any emotional support. I mean, it's kind of his fault because he scared everyone off, and like making Verona do it is the worst way to go about getting some. But y- you got to feel sorry for the guy that he does have no one. Like, it doesn't help.
Mm. Yeah, but he's made his own bed, right?
I mean, yes, but also like, and like again, this is not like Verona's job or whatever, but like bigger picture, like zooming out, not making it about Verona. It's also not helpful for him to be alone like this. Like, like, yeah, it's his own bed or whatever, but like, if we want to try and help him at some point, like that's gonna have to get sorted somehow.
Mm.
But that's a David problem. That's not a Verona problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, but yeah, I don't. Just some of those moments where I still feel so sad for Brett because it's like he does need somebody like David who can try and help him sort out shit so he isn't so fucking lonely.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Although yeah, you can only get so far doing that when he's refusing to change or help himself.
yeah. um. So yeah, Verona brings Sylvia to the house on Half Street and kind of gingerly walks up to the topic of introducing her mother to magic.
Yeah, and again, I love that this has seemingly happened without any prodding from Jasmine or Kelsey or Connor yet. Like, Verona seemingly was just thinking about doing this anyway. Like, I don't know. As I was reading 23.a, it felt like a bit of a controversial take for me to agree with Connor and Jasmine that Verona needs a parent. But we kind of come into 23.2, and it seems to me like the vibe was that Verona agrees and was actively pursuing options in that regard anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
I wonder. I guess the parents haven't had this conversation, so Verona was kind of already at this point.
it seems like it. There are some lines from Jasmine on the promenade at the end of the chapter that made me feel like maybe they had talked about it
Mm,
already, but like
yeah.
it definitely seems like Verona is on a level hoping she can talk to her mum about this. Like,
Mm,
she wants this. Like, so even if the parents did kind of get the ball rolling, it doesn't really seem like anything Verona's being forced into.
mm,
Um, like, Verona seems on board. I also really, really like the detail. Verona sort of, as she's gently nudging her mom bit by bit into like introducing her to this world. Um, Verona has this moment where she thinks on how her and her mom both share this flaw, which is they will be too willing to give the other space and like back
yes,
off. Like,
yes.
and so she's kind of having to make a conscious effort to like not interpret everything her mom says as a no and phrase things in a way that her mom can't think she's saying no. And I don't like, it was such a fun little detail that again is just showing like Verona is so maturely on top of her game right now that she can sort of identify that and work with it.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the big question is, would Sylvia be okay with living in Kennet, right? Because I think
Yeah.
Verona doesn't feel like she can introduce her mum to magic without the answer to that being yes, because that basically tie her to Kennet for a little while. I don't know. I mean, like, would you be okay living in Kennet for 1 or 2 years, or like whatever, 4 years? I think that's more of a reasonable question, approachable question.
Yeah, and there's also a part of me that still can't move on from like, when Sylvia's like, "Oh, I'd be miserable and I'd be the worst version of your mum, and I
Yeah.
don't want that for you." And part of me just can't help but hear that and be like, "Well,
You decided
buck
to have a
up!" Like, yeah,
child.
yeah,
Yeah.
like that ship sailed 14 years ago. Like, obviously, like, to a degree, like you don't want someone to be completely miserable because that's how you turn into a brat as a parent.
Yes,
Like,
of course.
but like, yeah, I don't know, like figure it out, like see if there's a way you can. Yeah, I don't know. This is the thing with Sylvia is like, as a parent, she's another one of these interesting case studies because. Yeah, part of me can't help but be like, get over it, spend a few years in Kennet for your daughter's sake, and then the other part of me is like, but also I get it, and you don't want to become the worst version of yourself. So it's like it is a bit tricky, but yeah.
Yeah.
I I feel like what it seemed the tactic Verona was going for was to introduce Sylvia to all the extra people she's going to get to meet once she has access to magic, because that effectively gives you Kennet Below and Kennet Found as well, and hoping that that's enough
Yeah.
interesting characters that she could be compelled to stay for a few years, as you
Which I
said.
think is fair. Like,
Yeah, it's a
surely.
good angle of attack, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just a shame she doesn't get there.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, sorry, I know I'm jumping ahead, but it's so funny that Luna is here and is seemingly caught in her own equivalent of like you went to school without your pants on dream.
Luna. What Luna hair? What a character.
She's such a dweebus. I love it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so turns out it was just a dream. Verona was testing the water to see how it would go before actually having the conversation for real, which is a classic Wildbow move.
yeah, it's good. Has anyone been keeping a tally of how many times he's fucking got us with this shit? Because it's getting outrageous.
Yeah.
It's fool me 100 times. Shame on me at this point. But again, I love how it doesn't feel cheap. Alpi's been so established. The idea of awarening people in the dreams has been established. It kind of happens, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's actually a good plan. That makes sense. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
But also, after Verona gets pulled out of this dream by her hand cramp, apparently Alpi managed to wrap it up by just pretending she was having a pregnancy scare, which is just so not helpful. I had a
Mm,
good chuckle at that.
yeah.
Wow, Alpi can just be such a ditz
Good
sometimes.
on you, Alpi. But yeah, so then the council all gathers at the promenade, and the Kennet others drop the ultimatum: one more go. And Verona immediately notices the parents aren't as surprised by this as they should be.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those things where in retrospect you're like, yeah, of course you weren't getting this past Verona. She's primed to not fall for this.
Mm,
I really love, among the list of people who are here, which doesn't include Rook, is the Negateers who have turned. So Yi Yun, Harry, Adrian. I think there was somebody else listed, but I'm very excited to see more of them.
mm,
Like Yi Yun has just not been in the story since she walked out the door in 20.z.
mm,
I'm so excited to see what she's contributing.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, I like that they've come up with a bit of a nuanced plan here, which is the Kennet others make an initial foray to kind of occupy Charles and his team, at which point the Kennetiers do their typical drop some big hammer on them kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good plan. It allows them to kind of go out with a bang, as it were. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it works on a number of levels. Like from a narrative perspective, it's fun that we could kind of. I remember running into this in Summer Break. There are so many characters with cool powers and so many moving parts. It's almost you can't keep them all on screen. Like Summer Break kind of constantly had to just not show us what some people are doing, what we're
Mm,
doing, because you couldn't contain it all. So there's an aspect here where now we've got like 3 times as many characters as we did that time. Of course, we just want a lot of it to happen early. But it also provides a great opportunity for us to get some cool interludes of the initial foray before we move into what the trio have cooked up as their
yes.
final hammer swing, which is again just such a perfect way of how they operate. It's like let us distract them, and then
Mm.
you guys come in and sweep the leg. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, narratively it works. It works for their character. It's also like I think it is really the Kennet others stepping up in the way the Awarenance asked for. Like they're putting themselves as the front line people first, the potential cannon fodder. And there's a certain fairness to them being the ones to do that after all the shit they've done to the Kenneteers and the amount of times the Kenneteers have done that for them.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I I'm kind of surprised by how well Verona reacts to this, right? Like she yeah, she kind of seems to understand almost immediately what the parents were why the parents had to do this. And I guess
Mm.
maybe doesn't react strongly because she's just kind of like, well, I'll just start collecting magic items, whatever. But still, like she's not she doesn't seem phased at all. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, like she's already actively, working against it. So she's clearly not like pro, but like, yeah, she doesn't like make a big deal out of it. Like doesn't go and immediately tell Lucy and Verona and try to confront the parents or anything. Like I mean, honestly, I think Toadstool deserves credit here for. I think he makes a good case for not villainizing the parents here, like because she kind of asks him, and Toadstool's like, "Look, yeah, they threw the awakening oath at us and the potential to forswear us, but like." Honestly, they treated us as people. They were fair about it, and like as fair as you can be when you're wielding that kind of weapon. But we think we think that what they were asking was fair. Like Tootsie tells her that he thinks it's fair, and I mean, we've seen him interact with parents like Anthem before, so I do think it means a lot coming from Toadstool that he was like, "Look, they came and did this, but we agreed and voted on it and have gone ahead with
Mm,
it."
mm,
Like, it means a lot that Toadstool kind of says that they're on board.
mm. Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think the fact that Toady like points out the reasonableness of this is really what helps it land even more, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, it is funny how easy a time the Ken and others have of creating this narrative of we think you should stop. Like
Yeah,
they're sort of like we've
yeah, they're kind
decided
of
that
already
this.
on that page, I guess.
Yeah, but yeah, they're like, oh, we've decided this will be the final thing, and because we don't want to put you anymore in danger, and the Kenneteers are a bit like what, but like. With the exception of Verona, I think it comes across as extraordinarily believable because it is a reasonable request. It's like, hey, 14-year-old girls, we don't want you doing war anymore. Like,
Hmm.
like the reason the Ken and others have such an easy time kind of fooling everyone else with this is because it just makes sense.
Yeah,
So yeah, like it doesn't work on Verona, but yeah, I think you're right. The fact that she's not really kicking up a fuss about it says a lot.
yeah, for sure.
So there is also talk of, if they don't win, what could happen. And Toad mentions that Gerhild is said to be on the way 5 or 10 years from now, which is some of the most sequeliest sequel bait I've ever seen in my life. I love it.
Mm, yeah, yeah, definitely. Can't wait for that one. I think that featured in the comments on the Reddit thread a lot. The discussion of sequels.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the group kind of plans their next moves. Lucy's going to visit the Sable to see what his deal is. Verona plans to gather magic items so that she can still operate, even if their magic is cut off. Good on you, Verona.
I do love her call out though that is how Charles did it. Like you know what I mean? It's she's just copying his playbook. Like Charles was able to operate while Forsworn because he had magical items. So I kind of love this as a plan, and I like part of me almost hopes that this is actually how something happens in the end game. Like the
Mm,
Kenneteers get told they've lost and they have their magic cut off as per the arrangement, and then Verona drops a bomb with a bunch of magical items
yeah.
because she can still fight. Like that would be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm super hyped for Lucy's plan to go visit the Sable because I don't think we've really seen like a Lucy led trip to a judge before. But also I feel like I was calling out when all the stuff with the Sable went out. I was like, this neutrality thing is bullshit, and it's always so refreshing when you sort of make a statement about something and then see Lucy echo it because it's like, oh, good, I was right if Lucy's saying it too.
Mm,
And I'm like, Lucy is the perfect person to challenge the Sable on what this neutrality means for him. Because yeah, I don't buy it, and I'm glad Lucy doesn't buy it. And if there was anybody who was going to be able to kind of challenge him on it, it's Lucy, and that's very exciting.
yeah. Yeah. Bloody Verona. Do you remember when she was gainsaid and was just relying on magic items and was like killing everybody?
Yeah, either the Cleo fight is the big one in my head of where she really used magical items effectively.
Yeah.
Good excuse to get witch hunters actually involved. Like
Oh,
I don't know if we expect witch hunters to appear in this end game at all, but it'd be nice if they did.
yeah, yeah. But that's the end of our chapters for this week. Not the end of our episode because we've still got some comments to read through and some discussion question answers, but some good chapters this week talking about parenting and how we handle these kids.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I did. Sorry, I know this. I'm jumping back a lot now, but I loved when this sticky beak woman was like pestering Verona and the hooligans at the house. I thought it was really funny that the half street hooligans really do actually have the like kids these days vibes.
Mm,
Like, if you were ever going to say, "Oh, kids these days have no respect and are little goblins," like it would actually be about like if you're saying that about the hooligans of Half Street, that's actually kind of fair.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough.
Anyway, yes. Should we get into the Reddit comments we've pulled?
Yeah. Your one came first chronologically, so why don't we start with yours?
Yeah, sure. So I've got this one from Dancing Anatolia in the 23.a thread. Basically, Dancing Anatolia brings up the quote where Jasmine is talking to Miss and challenges Miss on the idea of the fact that you were saving them doesn't negate the fact that you were using them.
Yes, yes.
And Dancing Anatolia compares this to Bristow, which I really love as a comparison because I don't think it's fair because
Mm,
Bristow was doing it from a position of privilege as opposed to Miss. But I
mm,
do think it's a very interesting comparison in that there's something there.
mm. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Bristow is referenced in this section as well, isn't he? Or is that
Uh,
Alexander? They do talk about the BHI headmaster, I think, but maybe they're talking about Alexander. I can't quite remember.
I think Alexander comes up in the context of dead people domains when
Mm.
we did skip over it. There's a kind of grim part where Verona is like, "Oh, by the way, if I
Oh
do
yeah,
die, you can
yeah,
have my domain."
yeah,
But yeah, I don't remember Bristow coming up, but he could have.
yeah. Anyway, um, yeah, good comment. My comment I put out was from Bavarian Barbarian, which points out that it's only been one chapter since the parents decided to get the Kennett others to play bad guy, and Verona's already onto them. Yeah, my reaction too was like, it's only a matter of time before the Kennetiers find out about this, and I don't know how they'll. Yeah, I don't know how they'll react. I guess.
Yeah, it's going to be very exciting to see, like, because yeah, the parents laying down this ultimatum feels like the climax of the parenting aspect of this story, in the way that this has kicked off the final battle of what it means to be a parent, and it feels like the Cannoneers coming up against it will be it will be the actual battle itself. I can't wait to see what that looks like.
Mm, yeah.
Especially for Lucy, who seemed the most outraged that she was being told by the Kennett others to stop fighting.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I don't know. I don't know. We'll have to see. But we also had a discussion question we were running this week, Elliot, which was if you were Avery, what would your text to the parents be?
Yeah, how would you let your parents know you were alive?
Yeah. We got a lot of joke answers to this one. Playing along the same themes that Avery did of bad responses.
I don't think. Yeah, no, you're right. Avery's is kind of shit. I don't know.
Mm.
I really liked Shmee001 who just suggested they'd give the phone to Snowdrop, let her do it.
Yep, great. Can't see any way that would go wrong. We had a few Guess Who's Back agains. Uncle Thermoscales had one. Normal non-Eldritch guy had one.
Yeah.
What were some other ones? Drake Blood said, "Hey y'all, I'm not dead. Don't make a replacement just yet." Ripper 1337 had the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. So some good jokes and references. But let's talk
Yeah.
through some of
So,
those.
what do you know? The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated.
That's a
Sounds
Star Wars
familiar.
one, isn't it?
Oh, okay. I
Isn't
was like,
it?
I know that from somewhere.
I'm
Okay.
pretty sure it's Star Wars.
I liked I'm easily impressed. Who?
Maybe not. I don't know.
So somebody's saying it's from Samuel Clemens, but I don't know who that is. So anyway,
There's
um,
that's the isn't that the CEO robot in Doom?
oh god, it is something like that actually.
Oh no, that's Samuel Hayden. Sorry,
Okay,
might be.
Mark Twain. He's an author, I think.
Mm, mm,
Anyway, we had I'm easily impressed. I'll just read out this whole thing. Um,
yeah.
Hey, this is A. Kelly. I know I've been gone for a few days, but I wanted to let all my fans know I'm still alive. Just been dealing with some personal issues recently. Thank you to all my fans for their love and support. I've got some great new content coming out soon that I'm really excited to share with you. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
That's
Which, yeah,
good. Yep, that's a good one.
I liked Propaganda Pagoda expected that Kelsey's response to this text would be "Don't bother coming home," which I think is fair.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think Sengachi gave us a good one. Very simple, but it's
Yeah,
me. I'm still alive. Love you. See you soon, kind of thing. Um, which yes, would probably get the job done.
Yeah, this is one of those answers, and I'm always kind of jealous, and I hate people a little bit who are able to write messages like that because that I think the tone of this one is really good and kind of covers all the bases. Like, yeah, it's me. I'm alive. I love you. So it's not drowning in too many details, but it kind of addresses the big points. Like, I feel like I'm particularly bad at that sort of thing.
Mm,
Like, if somebody brings you bad news, I don't know how to like respond or whatever, and I'm jealous of people who are good at this.
mm, yeah. Yeah.
I think Teve had a very similar one,
Yes.
where they just said, "I'm alive, feel like shit, more details soon, love you."
Yeah.
Which,
Gets the point across and saves the actual reconnecting for when you're in person, which will be pretty
yeah,
soon. Teve
their
also
big thing,
said, if I was
oh,
feeling saucy, I'd add, so no need to try and make another kid.
yeah, which I believe is what Drake Blood also kind of talked about. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. Teve also made a big deal out of sending that short text like as soon as possible, which makes sense.
Mm, yeah. Propaganda Pagoda, I think, had a really good one. Hi, y'all. I'm back from the brink. I'm safe-ish here with Verona and Lucy and headed your way. I was injured. I'm recovering. I may wind up with just a scar on my hip, which gives the key info and gives a little bit of teaser for other things to keep your parents occupied while they're waiting for you to come back. Like, oh, how did she end up with a
Yeah.
scar on her hip? What do you think? Oh, well, give them something to ponder while they're waiting for you to arrive.
Yeah, yeah, it's another one that seems like it covers a lot of the bases.
Mm.
And high for some reason, High Y'all seems a little less ridiculous as an opener than Heya.
Yeah, definitely.
We got quite a few like High Y'alls, Hey Y'alls sort of thing, and it's just funny to me how much people didn't use Heya
Yeah.
because they're not idiots, Avery.
Yeah, hey, I was not the way to start, but yeah. Good responses from everyone. Thank you for sending them in. Now we have a new discussion question, Elliot, this week. Do you want to talk people through it?
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's pretty straightforward and relevant to what we've just been talking about for an hour and a half. The question is pretty simply: did the awarenants do the right thing here, and what role should they have as parents?
Mm,
Because I'm interested to get people's takes on not just the ultimatum, but like that whole conversation in 23.8. Like, do people think there were other lines they crossed, other things they should have? Like, for a while, as I was reading it, I was surprised at how little accountability the parents were taking for, like, say, Avery ending up where she was.
mm,
But they eventually kind of got there. But I'm just curious what people's overall impression is of the awareness after 23.8.
yeah. Yeah. I'm interested to see what people come up with. You can,
Yeah.
of course, leave your answers to this discussion question in our discussion thread, which is linked in the show notes down below.
Yeah, and hey, how about reviewing us on whatever podcasting platform you listen on? Those reviews help boost the podcast, which help
Mm-hmm.
boost Pale.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we need, now that we're definitely reaching the end of it, we want more people to read and catch up for All Packed Up too.
yeah, for sure. Um, if you want to support this show, um, you can actually. I've just skipped over a few. Why don't we go with this bit, which is if you want to find out more about the great shows on the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com. Find all the info about all the other Duff Media shows there.
Yeah, and don't forget about the Patreon, patreon.com/doof media. As we mentioned at the start of the episode, it's the patrons who vote on the fan art contest. So that's your way to see the entries early and also to, have your say in which one you think is the best because it'll be your money going to the winners.
Yeah, exactly right. While you're on Patreon as well, make sure you stop by Wildbow's Patreon and support Wildbow as well, because otherwise he'll take away your magic powers, and you don't want that.
Or he'll just take away the magic powers of the story. He's just going to stop writing if just not end the story.
Mm,
Pick a cliffhanger and leave us there if he doesn't get enough Patreon support.
yeah. So yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll catch you next time.
See ya.